Once you start calling a man a woman, it ceases to be so easy to keep him out of women's spaces and rights and everywhere else that these men want to invade.
The following is a conversation with Kellie-Jay Keen. Who is Kellie? Depends on who you ask. Ask a trans activist and you'll be told she's the leader of a trans exclusionary hate group. Ask the mainstream media and you'll be told she's a far-right neo-Nazi sympathiser. Ask a politically correct politician and you'll be told she'll not even be allowed in your country, for her speech is simply too evil, too hateful, and too dangerous to even be given a platform. But ask a traditional women's rights activist and you get a very different answer. You'll be told that Kellie is one of, if not the most inspiring, prolific, courageous women's rights activists of modern times. So which is it? Who exactly is Kellie-Jay and what exactly does she believe? What is true and what is just propaganda? What is she advocating for exactly? Where is all this division coming from? And how might it all relate back to masculinity, femininity, traditional gender roles, nature, nurture, narcissism and nihilism in the wake of religion? This and more in today's episode. Further, Kellie-Jay not too long ago organised an event in my hometown of Melbourne, Australia called Let Women Speak, and you may be familiar with her tour. And one of our members of parliament, Moira Deeming, helped with coordination, also gave a brief minutes-long speech on behalf of a friend on the day. The consequence, albeit with a few additional factors to consider, expulsion from our main Conservative party in Australia, the Liberal Party. Now, what to make of this? And what message does this send to young girls concerned but also afraid to speak up about their sex-based rights? Not just in Australia, but across the Western world more generally. Again, this and more in today's episode. Now, if you've watched or listened to the past few episodes of the CGC podcast, you'll know that this is part of a wider series of conversations that I'm currently having, attempting to unpack and make sense of gender and its implications. So before we kicked off today's conversations, I outlined for both Kellie and myself the goal as follows. How we think about, how we talk about, and how we define gender has a number of very real implications for the way that we live our lives and the way that we structure our society. But unfortunately, it seems that we are a confused and divided people on a number of gender-related issues, be it sports, be it safe spaces, or be it the treatment of gender dysphoria, especially so in children. And my hope in speaking with Kellie today is that we can do our part in fixing that division via dialogue. The goal of the conversation, first and foremost, is to understand what do we each believe and why. And then secondly, even if we disagree on this point or that point, if things get a little uncomfortable here or there, let us do our best to come together in pursuit of truth, reason, and the good to find common ground. Now, with all of that said, it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you the one and only Kellie-Jay Keen. I wanted to kick this off with, for people to get a very quick snapshot of what your goals are and what you see to be as the problem. So in a perfect world, let's say you were able to snap your fingers and have it your way. What exactly would change? What would it look like? What's the problem and what do you see as the solution?
Well, I think the first thing I change is the erosion and dilution of language. So the word woman, for example, would only be used for adult human females. And the word woman would be used when we mean adult human females. So, for example, we wouldn't be cervix havers, menstruators, and all the other crazy things that we're supposed to call ourselves these days. And no children, in fact, nobody actually would have so-called gender-affirming surgery, which is the mutilation of one's body in order to try and accommodate a disordered mind. So that really, I mean, overwhelmingly, this is one of the biggest lies, I think, because it's so easily provable to be false. But it's a really dangerous lie. And I think once you can convince somebody to say that a woman has a penis, you really are making that person susceptible to believe anything. You know, this really is, it's overused, but it really is Orwellian.
Okay, that's a great start. So I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, just as a way of stress testing exactly what you believe. So with something like the erosion of language, I know that a lot of people would say, why can't we just say, use people's preferred pronouns? Or why can't we just call someone a woman if it makes them feel included and comfortable? What would you say to that? Why is the language so important here?
Well, you really start to mask the truth once you start speaking in dishonest kind of ways. So once you say she, her, for example, for a man, then it becomes more difficult to protect the boundaries in which we need to protect women's spaces. So if John sits down at the table, he calls himself Janet and he gets up to go to the women's toilets, then sort of saying she can't use the women's toilets becomes more difficult. And then it's an easier lie. It's like it's the beginning of the lie, if you like. The pronouns of a hypnal essay is an absolutely fantastic essay that encapsulates the whole idea that it really is the thin end of the wedge. So that's why, like, once you start calling a man a woman, it ceases to be so easy to keep him out of women's spaces and rights and everywhere else that these men want to invade.
Right. Okay. So hypothetically, if, let's say, and this is something I've been trying to piece together with respect to the implications of the language, and hypothetically, if in all instances of the law, we were to change where it said woman to say biological female, and then, okay, we can refer to whoever feels more comfortable with the word woman as a woman. I suppose, why would that be a satisfactory solution, hypothetically? Or is there something specifically about the word woman beyond those legal implications?
No, I wouldn't be happy with that at all. The word woman has always meant adult human female. We know what the word woman means. We know the word woman means in some countries the person who's not allowed to leave the house without permission. We know the word woman means in some countries the woman that is going to be bedbound while she carries the baby of some rich couple abroad. We know what the word woman means. And once we decide that we can give that up and it's some sort of ethereal concept that isn't connected to an actual body, then we start losing what we aim for. And let's not forget, if we allowed these men for a long time to have the word trans woman, I think that was a mistake, because that made them a subcategory of woman. And then they decided trans woman wasn't enough, they're just women. And also they call themselves female. So whatever boundary we put around female language, that will be a boundary that these men will intend and will break. So no, they're not having the word woman.
Okay, so I suppose there's more to it than just the legal ramifications. It's also there's some kind of experiential aspect as well that you see as a lie to simply say that a biological male is a woman. To me, it seems funny wording it like that. But okay, so I suppose something I'd like to come back to a little bit later on is the root source of some of this, what many refer to as gender ideology, and what we might refer to as the pushing of a lie, or the swallowing of a lie, and the category confusion, perhaps. But so I know plenty of people who I think have the best of intentions and who genuinely want to help, right? To create a society that is as inclusive as possible, where people have the opportunity to thrive, essentially. Now, to those well-meaning people, what do you think they are missing, right? If they were to say, I don't see anything wrong here, they might have the pride flag in their house or whatnot. What are they missing? What is the well-meaning person missing?
I think they're missing the truth. And I think fundamentally telling a lie is a really harmful thing to do, and gaslighting those around you and forcing the lie upon other people is really, really harmful. So I think it's all well and good. Look, women in Malawi thought it was the right thing to do to sever the genitals of their daughters. Like, they believe that is the best thing they can do for their daughter. It's not. And eventually you just have to educate and educate and educate. And when women did this in villages in Malawi and went and talked to these women, they managed to free these women from this mind virus that made them think that it was right to physically harm their daughters. So it's just It's just education. Like, can it really be right that the solution to a child thinking they don't fit in is to alter their bodies, their sexual function, and their fertility? It's absolutely preposterous. And I think I heard someone talking about Davos the other day, and there's been a corporate agenda and a high-level elite agenda about this so-called transgender ideology being proliferated everywhere. And I think that often the people
Can you tell me what is Davos?
So Davos is an elite organization of basically, it's like the people that play Risk with your lives and my lives, my life. It's an organization. They meet in Europe. They have some sort of summit, and they decide everything. They decide what the direction of the world should be. And they will be really powerful. So the royal family go, presidents, prime ministers go, and they sort of meet and make global decisions, which I'm not a big fan of global decisions because it feels like I have no access to that sort of democracy because there is none. So Biden had a meeting with large corporations, governments, the WHO, the UN, and the World Economic Forum, in a bid to sort of push this LGBTQI plus and any other letter or symbol you could think of when he was vice president. So this is a long top-down game. And so I think people that think it's not harmful, they would probably choose themselves to also be a little bit anti-capitalist and a little bit anti-corporate. You know, they probably eat organic food and at the same time pump their children full of drugs that sterilize them. It's just illogical.
Okay. So Kelly, I'd love to use that as a bridge into where is this coming from and why? Because I know that it's very easy to see all of this and just have a question mark and go, I don't understand. When there are people who might be up the top who are pushing this, what we might refer to as gender ideology more generally, perhaps we can more clearly define that later on. There are people up the top who are advocating for this. The same goes in Victoria where I live and also on an international scale. But then there are also plenty of people who are supporting this as well. So what's going on? Where is this coming from? What's the agenda, we might say, do you think?
I think it's a political tool for some people. So I think we have to think that if you're a politician, then I think you're short-sighted, but I think you might see this as a political tool to gain leverage with voters. So rather than going into, like, if I was a politician in a city in America, for example, that's totally overrun with poverty, maybe homelessness, really difficult things to fix, then maybe I can just mask all of that and say that I'm a great human and I can put myself at the front of a pride parade. And then I'm not asked so many questions about poverty, about why the school taxation system doesn't work for poor kids in America. I can avoid all that. I can avoid solving the big issues because I can just consistently generate stories about LGBTQI, trans kids, etc. And then no one's saying, look, why have we got like 10% of our ex-military, or probably about 50%, living on the streets? You know, why have we got so much gun violence?
Right, so
why is there so much violence?
It's a virtue signaling.
Yeah, it's a total mask. So that would be a politician's reason. When it comes to corporations...
Okay, then, those...
Go on.
Sorry, go for it, Kellie-Jay. I think you're about to address
exactly. When it comes to corporations, it's another thing. Like, our Mercedes-Benz, when they celebrate the month of Pride, which, when did it turn into a month? It's so ridiculous. But anyway, when we celebrate the month of Pride and large corporations, global corporations kind of emblazon everything with a pride flag, we know they're not doing it in Saudi Arabia. We know that they're probably not doing it in Hungary or places in the world or Iran, places in the world where actually pride is a necessary thing, you know, that acceptance of homosexuality and lesbianism is a necessary thing. We know that corporations aren't doing it there, and we know that those same corporations have immoral practices elsewhere. You know, we know that Apple, for example, and Google and organisations like that have suicide nets around their factories in China. So again, it's another sort of masking of we're terrible people. There are stories all over the internet about how our working practices and how terrible we are, but look at us. We definitely want to promote the sterilisation of children, therefore we're good people. So
with that corporate side of things, that makes sense to me that there are some companies and also high-level politicians who will be virtue signaling, but I suppose that requires that you're virtue signaling to someone for their support, right? I think one added layer to the corporate side of things is, and this is something that I'm yet to fully comprehend, but I'm becoming aware of the fact that instead of companies just having a responsibility to the customers that they are serving and the shareholders, also having a responsibility to stakeholders. And then what if those stakeholders have a political agenda of some sort, and then how that might influence companies that might have previously been driven only by profit, who might now also have, for lack of a better word, been infiltrated by a political agenda. But with the notion that this might be in part a political tool as well as, for politicians as well as for companies to virtue signal, for the average person, for lack of a better word, where is it coming from the bottom up?
Well, it's not coming from the bottom up. It's a top down. So before the average person has had the chance to really explore an issue, they've been told what to think through consistent messaging, whether it's in school, we know that the biggest problem for teenage girls is still anorexia and bulimia. It's still eating disorders. But we as adults and schools and governments and responsible healthcare providers, in fact, all healthcare providers, and even social media platforms, we don't endorse that. We don't advertise gastric bands to girls who think they're too fat, who are already sort of teetering on being dangerously underweight. We just don't do that. That's something that we now do with vulnerable people. We tell them that they're right, that their body is wrong. So we've also got healthcare that making an absolute fortune out of creating a medical patient for life. And so for the average person who's not really going to look into this issue, they don't really care either way, just they're drip-fed this messaging that actually to be a nice person, a live and let live person, is to totally surrender to this nonsensical ideology. And you will get people my age who may be sort of, I don't even know. I don't know what it is. People in their sort of late, say, 30s to and upwards. And I'm nearly 50, but you'll get people saying, I don't really understand it. It's these, it's their thing. And as opposed to saying, well, it's a load of nonsense until you get to specific issues.
Okay.
And then they say, I saw that giant swimmer. That's ridiculous, isn't it? And he was in a changing room with girls, wasn't he?
Yeah, so this is where as well, I think there are certain key moments where people who aren't very invested in making sense of all this, they go, okay, hold on a second, this seems a bit too much. I'd previously been for inclusion, but now it's a matter of inclusion of what exactly? Because maybe inclusion to no end isn't all that inclusive.
Yeah, 100%.
Kelly, now this might be a point of disagreement for us. And I was hoping that we would find something that maybe we could tease apart. So I do think that there's a bottom-up layer to this. And I think it might have, I'm trying to piece it together, and something that you said in your documentary, the Let Women Speak US tour, which I'll pop in the link wherever, or the description wherever we upload this. You said something, I wrote it down here. You said, at one of your events, you said the most likely people to scorn are young white people. They don't understand what oppression is, so they've invented this new one so they can feel it. So what makes you think that, and why would someone want to be oppressed in your eyes?
Because we live in a society where oppression is currency, and I mean, you see it all the time. I see videos all the time. I saw a video the other day and it was like, what are whites good at? Why are white supremacists? You know, what are they good at? And it was a load of black people going, oh, genocide, violence. And it was just this, you know, and you just knew that if the language was switched at all, that it would be deeply racist, despicable, awful video, and it just wouldn't be allowed. And we would think that it was made by a group of white nationalists. It was horrendous. And so as a white person right now, it feels really uncomfortable to talk about because this is where we are, right, in 2023. But as a young white privileged person living in the United States of America, what's your currency? I mean, you can't even now, as a white young woman, talk about sexism unless that sexism is by an old white man or just other white men. You can't even talk. Black women in America cannot talk about sexism within their communities because they are seen as traitors to the black men in their lives. And we know that in America, for example, a black woman is 3 times more likely to be killed in her own home than a white woman because she is more likely to suffer domestic violence and fatal domestic violence. And so, you know, why wouldn't these white kids who are very privileged, why wouldn't they want some oppression all for themselves and invent that actually wanting to dress ridiculously and a 20-something man putting on a skirt is somehow some act of courage, and that makes him a different category of human.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that there may be and this ties into, I suppose, a bit of critical race theory, that there's an element of some white hating, we might say, as opposed to fighting racism, and also this redefining of racism in a way that is very, very much not like the Martin Luther King racism being discrimination against someone based solely on their skin color, and instead it being power. What is it? The power plus oppression, or something to that effect, where you can't be racist against white people. And we did an episode where we tried to unpack this, where we were asking people what is racism, and this kind of redefining was coming up. And so, look, that's where I see a bottom up. If there's a young person who is sold, one, the notion that they are fundamentally privileged, and as such, one, there's a burden of performance that says, given all of your privilege, if you don't do something absolutely miraculous with your life, or very impressive at least, then you're like the ultimate of ultimate failures. Whereas if you are oppressed and then you don't amount to anything, you don't do something productive, then it's like, well, you've got your oppression to lean back on. You've got a victimhood identity to play as a wild card and say, you know, it's not my fault, it's the system's fault. So I think there's a burden of performance in that respect. And that's where I think, and maybe it's a marrying of top down and bottom up, but there's an incentivizing for victimhood. And there's also an incentivizing for people to take any victimhood claim and say, valid. And in doing so, say, I am the savior. So I think there's this privilege conundrum, which I get the sense that it runs even deeper. So one thing that stood out to me when I was watching some of your content and familiarizing myself with your story, you said that, you know, you are a mother of, is it 4 kids?
4, yeah.
And you said so proudly, and I wonder whether this has something to do as well with a lack of celebration for gendered roles, and a lack of celebration of motherhood, and a lack of celebration for fatherhood and the masculinity that's required to make a woman feel safe such that she has kids. One thing that I wanted to kind of touch on with you today was, you've mentioned that, I think some people will see the trans inclusion movement and not at all understand or perhaps put their finger on how it might be misogynistic. And perhaps at what point it becomes misogynistic is a better way of framing it. How would you define misogyny? And then also, if you were to speak to perhaps the unthinking compassionate and to point out the coming to a head of the trans inclusion and the misogyny, how would you do it? What would you point to?
Well, misogyny is such an overused word that it's almost become difficult to describe on the basis of the fact that everything is misogynist. You know, someone looks at you the wrong way, that's misogyny. I think ultimately it's misogyny because it puts women into a bunch of behaviours and dress codes. And I think that's why trans activism is misogynist, because there is, for gendered roles is a whole big fat topic that I think we have to look at sexism. We have to look at what gendered roles can do for women and how long they've been around and what they really mean. And the fact that I got to stay home with my children would be arguably a gender role, but that isn't something my mother or grandmothers or anybody in my sort of family could ever afforded to do, because I come from like a lineage of not very well off people, and I was fortunate that I could stay home. So the fact that mothers staying home and looking after children was a really short period of time with a certain sort of woman that could do it. And what you had before that is you had women working and looking after their babies. And I think we've done it wrong. Whatever we've done it wrong, whether it's migration, whether it's not having extended families anymore. And so you've got maybe older people that aren't going out and working, and they're raising children. You know, there are other cultures that do it right, but then they do other stuff so badly wrong for children. You know, it might be better to raise a child in a whole family unit in somewhere like India, but then also in India, women are more likely to be raped just for going to the toilet. So whatever the sexual revolution brought, it brought some good things and bad. Did you pick that up? Let me just, I'm so sorry.
No, I didn't hear it. That's all good.
Sent me an announcement. Where was I?
No sweat.
Okay, so with gendered roles, I think we've just got to be careful. And I think what happened with the sexual revolution is what we pretended is that women and men were identical and the same, and we wanted and could have the same things. And that's because society is set up in this way. And other alternatives of women remaining kind of submissive and doing whatever men wanted, if that was what was happening in every single home, that's the thing we wanted to get free from. But I don't know whether the solution to that has actually made women happier. Maybe some women happier, but it's massive, right? It's just a massive, like, what on earth do we do that balances the fact that we are mammals and we do like babies and we want to look after them?
Yeah, and we have a nature. I think this is also a part of what we see going on today. I get the sense that there's a biological denialism where it's saying that it's almost as though biology is the last oppressive thing to overcome. But also this, I wonder whether there's a momentum behind the sexual revolution, we might say, of going, okay, well, maybe we can say that women don't have, biological females, women don't have to do this thing over here, and biological males and men don't have to do this thing over here. But then we've almost taken it too far where we've gone to say they're the same. And I wonder whether that's part of the problem here, is that we're not eyes open to our nature and our strengths and how the two can harmonize, and how if the goal is sameness or equality of outcome or inclusion to no end, to the point where we don't even have the category of male female, then what happens? And I feel like we're starting to see, in my eyes, what seems to be just those moments where you go, what is going on? How can this be possible? And you mentioned one before with sports and Leah Thomas. And I think that is just a singular instance where the regular person who doesn't think about all of this all too much goes, what is going on? With that said, another, one question that I'm just personally curious about with you, Kelly, is, are you religious, and what's your general take on religion? Because I know that you, again, in your documentary, you described gender ideology as a quasi-religious dogmatic cult. And so I was curious as to firstly, what you mean by that, and then also what your experience is with religion and how it might tie in here.
Okay, so I was raised in an atheist household, so I've never, ever had any even momentarily belief in God, ever. And I was an anti-theist, and I'm a great fan of Christopher Hitchens. And then I sort of, through this, I've begun listening to people who I'd previously thought, a little bit believe in a sky fairy, and probably used other equally as offensive terms. But my children went to a Catholic school because that was the best school in the area. And I would have really quite great debates with really devout Catholics. And both of us could really sort of get juicy about the debate. And nobody left. I never thought I was going to convince my Catholic friends to abandon their faith, and they never thought they were going to convert me, but we would really enjoy the debate. But now I sort of think maybe the human psyche, so I studied theology at university. I thought it was going to be
interesting.
I thought it was going to be some sort of exploration into world religions and belief systems all over the world. And if we could find a common something, then maybe we would find a kernel of truth, right? And I think the kernel of truth is, even though we didn't do this at university, that the human psyche, because we have the intellect to ask why, then we need answers to the questions, and we don't often have answers to the questions. And so sometimes the answer is God or the sun or whatever the belief system is. And what that does for us is that unites us in a belief that there is something far greater than ourselves. And I think the
transcendent.
Well, yeah, and that you have a purpose. And as we stop thinking that collectively, and I think the harm spreads, I just wonder, we don't have communities that we grow up in. I grew up in a place where most people knew my parents, most people knew my grandparents. If I was behaving badly somewhere, and also I grew up in an age where just random adults were allowed to tell you off. But if I was misbehaving somewhere, there was someone who knew someone who that's Jean's granddaughter, that's Violet's granddaughter or whatever. And also the lack of belief. And I don't know which is the bigger shame for humans, but we evolved to live in communities because it was better for us, for our survival. And now we don't really live in those communities. And I think both that and the community that religion or faith might give you, both of those have disappeared. And now we're left with a load of narcissists who, rather than looking outward, how can I be a better citizen? It's more about how can the world be better to me and my needs.
Yeah, preach. And so, look, this is for me, this is part of the ongoing religious debate, we might say, with respect to, what exactly do people mean by God, and what does it mean to be religious? And so for some people, it's the sky fairy. For some people, it's just tell me what to do, please. But then for some people, it's these deep, deep questions about morality and what we should be aiming for, and also having some kind of story or moral framework with which to orient ourselves and to say, okay, I'm going to move in that direction because that's the proper goal, and I'm going to sacrifice my immediate impulses in service of that. And in the absence of a shared unifying goal, what you might have kind of, when you were alluding to there being something at the center of all these religions, in the absence of that shared unifying goal, maybe we default into narcissism. And then also, I think in a way we're producing narcissists because there's like this, I don't know whether it ties back to that concept of burden of privilege, but there are some people who, we're more abundant than we've ever been before. We're more prosperous than we've ever been before as a species. And then it's like, what are we supposed to do with all this opportunity? And sometimes if someone just says, I'm a victim, and we say yes, we can become the savior. And so I wonder whether there's this almost a pathological victim-savior complex going on that is occurring in the absence of religion. And I don't mean the type of religion that is a sky fairy. I mean more so a type of religion that is, there is such a thing as a moral way of being. There is such a way as the good. And we might slightly disagree with respect to what that good looks like. But that's the type of conversation I imagine that you're having with those Catholic friends of yours. It's like getting to the heart of what should we be aiming at and why. And if we don't have that, then I suppose my concern is I've heard a quote that just hit me, and I'm not going to be able to remember who it was. It was something to the effect of, it's not that we don't believe anything. We can't not believe anything. But the man who doesn't, or woman, the person who doesn't believe in religion or something to that effect, it's not that they don't believe, it's just they're more susceptible to believing in anything. And that's where, again, we come back to the what you mentioned earlier around the lie, right? The lie that there is no difference here. And if that's, one observation that I've had recently is, if you were trying to confuse for one reason or another, and if you were trying to get to the heart of all distinctions, perhaps maybe the two most fundamental distinctions that you would try and break down or convince people of there is no distinction is up and down and biological female and biological male. And then if, you mentioned before that it's the small end of the wedge, if you can get that in, then anything else is possible. So I also get this sense, with respect to the well-meaning person who's supportive of trans people or trans inclusion or trans activism, who hasn't necessarily thought about all the implications or hasn't gone deep, that's a very easy part of this to overlook, is that it's you can't just go along, at least in my eyes, and I think you've played a big role in opening my eyes to this. You can't just go along with the branding. You have to look deeper, and you have to be able to see the implications and then ask, okay, where is this coming from and what's going on? So, look, I think that's a nice segue into, now that we've kind of touched on some of the potential sources here, be it a lack of meaning, prosperity that we don't know what to do with, potential misogyny, or something that I wanted to hear you speak about and hear your perspective on as well was, there are some people who will see a young gender-confused girl who wants to remove her breasts and say, whatever you want to do, whatever you feel most comfortable with, I'm here to support and love you. And I can't think of anything more misogynistic if we define that as woman hating or feminine hating, than encouraging a young girl to chop her breast off. And I suppose that's another question that I have for you is, why are people getting to that stage? Why are parents who love their kids getting to the stage where they are saying, I love and support you, and therefore I'm going to gender affirm?
Oh, God, because parents have been fed a narrative as well. I mean, I think once your child is 16, any sort of teenage, you have less influence. And so parents have been told that if you don't affirm, your child will kill itself. Now, that isn't true. It's demonstrably not true. I personally think if your child is like primary school age and you'll go along with it, it's your idea. It's 100% something that you gain. And we know that it's more women that are more likely to go along with transitioning their children, and often putting it out there on social media and becoming that their own identity becomes the fact that they're the mother of a so-called trans child. And we know that men are more likely to transition in the home and bring their fetish home and expect the whole family unit to go along with it. And that is much more likely to occur when a woman is pregnant, so when the man's wife is pregnant, or when his daughter goes through puberty. Sometimes men find their AGP too difficult to keep down. So I can't remember your question.
Kellie-Jay, can you expand on what you just mentioned? So I understand, and I'd like to unpack this with you. I think I understand why why women might be more likely to gender affirm their kids. But then you mentioned that men are more likely to transition when their daughter is going through puberty. Can you explain that to me and what you see as the root cause?
Well, look, I fundamentally think autogynophilia is a narcissistic, it's full of narcissism, right? It's not the only thing, but I think fetish is ultimately narcissistic. I even think so-called gender dysphoria is narcissistic. Most mental illness has an element of narcissism because the person is really focused on themselves and thinks that whatever about themselves makes such a difference to everybody else, or little minuscule bits of themselves make such a difference to themselves. So I think narcissism is, even if it's
center of the universe type thinking.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those men are suppressing sometimes, or hiding, or not really thinking they're entitled enough to come out as autogynophiles. They will call themselves, coming out as trans, but we know that men come out as autogynophiles, really. And so when their daughters...
For someone who's not familiar with autogynophile, can you give us a definition or clarify that for someone? Because even myself, I've heard the term a number of times before, but...
It's when a man is sexually aroused by himself as a woman, essentially. So he is often, when these men come out as autogynophiles, when they sort of really let the world know, there will be numerous photographs, like crazy level photographs of themselves dressed as women. And it's also a form of coercive control within a relationship, because it will be incremental demands. So it'll be like, I'm just going to paint my nails. It'll just be around the house. And then it'll be, oh, I forgot, I've got it on. And then it might be,
is there any trans, in your eyes, is there any trans person who isn't a autogynophile? Like, for example, could a man transition and it not be because of autogynophilia?
I think rarely, yes. But with the explosion of porn, I think it would be very difficult to separate the two now. Obviously, gender dysphoria is something we call a certain disorder, that when somebody focuses predominantly on their own genitals and thinks that they're wrong. And actually, that's preposterous. And it's clearly something in somebody's mind, because there is no such thing. Especially with an absence of belief in souls, there is no such thing as an ethereal gender, as something that exists in a person that isn't related to their body. That's just
A gendered
insane.
soul. Yeah, yeah. And we get back to
So-
the religious tones here.
Yeah,
And I think
that's why. And it's dogmatic, right?
Yeah. Yes. I can't for the life of me see how you can feel like a man or feel like a woman or say that you are a man or are a woman, gender speaking, as opposed to sex, without basing that sense of subjective feeling on your stereotype of what it feels like to be a man or a woman, or what it looks like to be a man or a woman. And that's where I wonder whether that's one of the little skips in logic where we say, your gender identity can be this or that, whatever you say it is, but really that to say if I were to say I feel like a woman, that has to be based off my conception of womanhood. And
Yes.
if I were to be, say, a young feminine man, or a young man who doesn't fit into my rigid category of what it means to be a man, and then I'm celebrated for, say, I'm not celebrated for not being masculine, but I'm celebrated for perhaps adopting a victimhood identity, like being a trans woman, and then celebrated for doing so. You can start to see some very perverse incentives. One thing that I hadn't put together that I was curious to hear your thoughts on was the role or influence of porn here. I don't understand how that fits into the picture yet.
Oh, okay. Let me just quickly address the breast thing, and then we'll do the porn thing. They seem mildly attached to each other. So a young woman wanting to remove her breasts, I think we have to really examine what is it about breasts that girls so closely associate with being visible women. I mean, I think we know because they're sort of objects, they're pieces of flesh right at the forefront of our bodies, but they've been made such a thing that I'm sure there must be some countries, in fact, we know there are, where breasts aren't consistently referred to. We know that there are sort of like the Maasai, for example. I don't think they have a real kind of sexual attachment to breasts in the way that we do in the West. So there's something about the whole breast thing that even girls that don't even call themselves boys, maybe call themselves non-binary, like pretend they're neither, they have their breasts removed. And then I think we can really easily just take that little fine thread and take it all the way to porn, where, men are watching. So I spoke to a woman. I give you an example, and I think that it will illustrate it a little bit more clearly. So I spoke to a woman, and she didn't know her son was an autogynophile, and he was, and he was decided that he was a girl, and this was through watching copious amounts of porn as a mid-teenager through lockdown. And she had a conversation with him one day, and she said,
he's turned on sexually by envisaging himself as a woman.
Yes, but he'd watched porn, and his reason for wanting to be a woman is because he enjoyed watching lesbian porn, and he wanted to be one of the women. So then he thought he was trans. And I think if you consistently watch imagery where women are reduced to body parts, and women are reduced to things that you do something to, not whole beings. I mean, I haven't watched porn, so I certainly did. Well, I did for a research. Oh, it was just awful. But I haven't watched copious amounts of porn, so what I know from research is that you are desensitized to women as full human beings. And maybe you are to men as well. Maybe you then... Look, if porn can convince teenagers these days that anal sex is a totally normal, routine part of sexual activity in which women enjoy themselves, when actually physiologically we don't have any pleasure receptors like men do in that area, then we know that particular part of sex is a performative thing. And I'm not going to cast kind of moral judgment, but we know that there are elements of all sexual activity which is about pleasing your partner more than actually physiologically getting pleasure yourself. And that would be, in most normal, routine, happy, intimate relationships, that would happen all the time because we are in a mutually kind of happy relationship where both people want each other to be happy. So that would be really quite normal. I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, but we have now coerced girls into, and boys, into thinking that certain things are normal. And we know that about 10% of porn, that might be in a certain region, but we know a lot of porn is basically porns involving men with breast implants. And so why wouldn't that coerce? If it can coerce people into getting rid of all of their body hair.
Okay, so I understand. Yep. So the idea being here that for a young boy, perhaps who's exposed to pornography, and over again, to which he is completely evolutionarily unadapted, it can lead to a sexual objectifying women to be a sexual object for one's gratification.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, exposure to young girls, they can see it and be utterly mortified or almost terrified of, I don't want anything to do with this. It might be genuinely fear inciting. And if that's what it means to be a woman, maybe I don't want to be a woman. Yes. So there's this, again, this comes back to me for like we're losing the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine. And, you know, because you said before, there are some girls who might identify as non-binary and pretend that they are neither. But I think that people who identify as non-binary are often, I think what a lot of them mean is, I don't want to be this stereotypical, and also I don't want to have the expectations from other people of the stereotypical man or the stereotypical woman. So it's, as opposed to, I just wonder whether if we celebrated womanhood, if we celebrated what it means to be a mother, if we celebrated manhood and what it means to be a father, and we encouraged young boys to become strong men capable of taking care of a woman such that she feels safe becoming a mother, how much of this confusion and also whether would dissipate perhaps or be ironed out, and how much we might actually incentivize for young boys and young girls to embrace their nature in a way that is socially beneficial and also on an individual level beneficial.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? What is our nature? Like, what is our nature? I mean, I've got a dog that had puppies, and so both parents we own. The male dog was not interested at all in any of it, and the female was very much interested in, you know, when the puppies whimpered, she went back and looked after them. And so then we have to ask, what is our nature? Like, my nature was quite I got on much better with boys. I was a running, jumping, climbing trees type girl. I didn't particularly enjoy sport, but this is another thing that does the society in which we live, where actually we don't even touch people very much. We don't interact face-to-face very much. We don't have intergenerational conversations very much because of this community which doesn't seem to exist anymore. We have kids spending more time on their Twitter. Own and only interacting online. Like, it just all feels like... I think
just quickly on that online piece, sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's a little bit hard with the lag, but I was just going to say there that I think back on the narcissism point, that part of the way that you develop a child, not that I have kids, but I'm very invested in understanding how to raise them properly. A good way to perhaps incentivize narcissism is to not have a lot of social contact, such that the child has to learn how to integrate their impulses in a social manner. And the digital world, it's almost like the regulations on the social behavior have been taken away to a degree, and I think that can incentivize this this narcissism. But I take your point with respect to like what exactly is the nature, and when you were describing your tendencies as a child, and I would say even now, like there are certain parts of our personalities that are going to be gender non-conforming. You know, there might be a certain part of my personality that's more female typical, and a certain part of your personality that's more male typical. And in that respect, I think everyone is for a degree of freedom. It's like you live out your authentic, or I'm not sure what quite the right word is there, but you live out your values, even if they're not gender conforming. But also, that doesn't mean that there isn't utility and value in those expectations, I suppose, of young boys and young girls. Like, if there isn't an expectation of young boys to become strong and capable men, then there aren't any strong and capable men for women to feel safe to have kids. And so that, again, this is where I feel like I'm trying to reconcile the letting people live their lives authentically, I'm not sure if that's the right word, with there are certain things that you as a man or a woman are needed for and need to do. And if too many people don't break away from those natures or gender stereotypes, then we have big problems as a collective. And I wonder if this is one of them.
We have, this is quite a broad movement that I'm involved in, and there will be academic feminists, some academic feminists, who will talk about women as some sort of theory, right? So what do, women, men are like this and women are like this, and isn't it terrible that men are like this, and women don't want that. And then there's women that actually who want to go out and date men. There's heterosexual women. And there's probably a gap between what women think they want and what women want. And I think that's the same for men. What men think they want and what men want.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
why do you think there's this gap?
I don't know. Look, I'm a little bit instinct, kind of. I just believe in my instinct, and I'm pretty certain that I'm right most of the time. And my husband is a proper bloke, right? He's a hefty man. And I think often maybe they don't imagine that that's what I would go for, but that's what I like. And I have no choice in that because that's who I'm attracted to. And he's like very much, he's not similar to any other man that I've ever been out with, but he was the first sort of really solid man that I went out with, and then we moved in after 2 weeks. And I think that it's my chemicals that told me that, right? It's my attraction that told me that. It wasn't a checklist of, is he the 10 things that I thought would be really, really important. And so I don't know, maybe sometimes there's just too much talking. And actually, when I talk to feminist women who talk about, and men have always been like this, and I really don't like it when they do this thing or that thing. And I'm like, well, what do you want? Like, we all know what we don't want. We can all write down what we don't want. But what is it? What is man's role in society in 2023? And I realize that I'm a women's rights campaigner talking about what men's roles are, but I'm a heterosexual woman. I have a daughter and I have 3 sons, and as far as I'm aware, and as far as they're aware, they're all going to end up with opposite sex partners. And it's just like, well, what do any of them want? And maybe sometimes the negotiation is more interpersonal in your own interpersonal relationship, and maybe society just needs to make sure that whatever those roles are respected, as long as it's. But I don't know. Do I think it's why? Do I think any woman?
I'm with you, Kelly. I'm with you. And this is where I don't think anyone is opposed to having a masculine woman date a feminine man, or whatever. But also, we need masculine men and we need feminine women. Otherwise, we don't have families. and we don't have families capable of rearing healthy children. And this is, again, I wonder whether it's just I think it was Douglas Murray who I heard describe it as, it's almost as though there's these various movements that are focused on making things better, and the objective might be inclusion, or the objective might be equality. And then it's like we've clocked that goal, the original goal, and then it's like, what do? We don't have a meaning or purpose. And so we try and create the story that lets us continue fighting that along that particular line, because without it, we're bereft of a meaning or a direction. And again, this is where just to share a quick personal anecdote. When I was younger, I grew up with a Catholic mother, and when I was about 12, I got to the point where I just thought, I hate the sheep-like aspect of going to church, and I don't just want to listen to someone and do as they say, and then when I ask why, be told, don't ask questions. And so I stopped going to church, and to the dismay of my mother. But it's through listening to, in particular, like talks between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, and I would have very much thought myself to be on the atheist side of Sam Harris, and then hearing people like Jordan Peterson talk about religion and going, I wonder whether this has a part to play in what we're seeing happen. And I wonder whether there's a deeper part to religion that I might have missed when I was younger, with respect to, it might not all be perfect, and we need to understand what the stories mean and how they might orient us. But without them, do we get this disembodied intellectualization to the point where we're maybe the intuitive knowledge that's encoded in the religious stories, we let go of that and leave ourselves susceptible to ideology. And maybe one of those ideologies is gender ideology, where it's just equality and inclusion to no end. This is where it gets really complicated, and I'm glad that we got to this religious point, because I'm not too sure that, again, it's one of those discoveries as you go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole and you start looking at, why is there this rather large biological male winning in women's categories of sport, and then going, how did we get to this point? Where does it come from? And how does that relate to like the dating marketplace, right? Where boys and girls are being told, be whoever you want, it's fine. And it's like, well, it's not that simple, right? There is an average of what women are looking for in a man, and there is an average of what men are looking for in a woman. And maybe we ought to embrace those natures, we might call it. Kelly, I think this is perhaps a...
I think it's community.
Go, please, tell me.
I don't necessarily think it's religion per se. So I don't think it's the God aspect of it. I think it's really fundamental that as human beings, so I believe in, I have no evidence for this. I just feel, right, and there's a really good book by Gavin DeBeck called The Gift of Fear. And he talks about how a mouse, once it thinks it hears a cat, doesn't wait and rationalize and go, oh, perhaps I imagined it. A mouse will just bolt as soon as its fear receptors are engaged, it goes, fight or flight, right? We as humans don't do that so much. But I think that the reason that babies
maybe
and
we
dogs...
do with lions, or, with certain things? Is it just that we have, because there's more intellectualization, we can temper that fear response? Am I kind of with you on that?
Maybe we do rationalize it. That's what predators actually really bank on, that somebody will be afraid but will rationalize it and talk themselves out of their fear, and that's how predatory predators sort of get into wherever they need to be. They just hope that people are too polite and rational to trust themselves. But with this lineage, this thing so I'm born as a human being, and one of the things that babies do, and I watch my little puppies do it to its mother, when they feed, to stimulate like milk production, you press, right? So the little puppies do it, your children will do it when they feed, they will sort of grab and sort of pinch your skin. And so that's a mammal thing, right? So that's something that we've got since way before we look like this.
Yep.
And so I think it's not beyond the wit of like just logic to think that that's not the only thing that's passed down through my genes as a female. I think there's probably loads of kind of ancestral lessons and rules that are also carried through. We know, for example, that babies who grandmothers suffered trauma because those eggs are produced in the so when you're carrying your baby girl, she already has eggs, so you basically carry your grandchildren, the eggs that will produce your grandchildren as a mother. And so that trauma can be transferred down. So we know that. So I'm just thinking that when it comes to female behaviors, if we could find out exactly what those female behaviors are, and the fact that females give birth, and so one of our primary roles as mammals is to give birth and get those babies to survive, it would be quite stupid to think that there aren't some commonalities amongst the female sex, and therefore commonalities amongst the male sex, which are totally nature and not nurture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, coming back to this theme of biological denialism, I wonder whether it's we are so prosperous and lacking of direction that the last point of oppression is actually our biology, our bodies, which is why I wonder whether, and I wonder what kind of personality it takes to enjoy, or to think, I'm not sure if enjoy is the right word, but gender affirming therapy, whether there's some kind of God complex there as well. I have my concerns. And what you mentioned about the gift of fear, I've heard that described as, or I'm not sure whether there's a relationship there with respect to the fear of God, and God maybe representing like a moral framework. And if that moral framework isn't there, we don't have a fear that we don't have a fear that keeps us social. And again, so just to kind of relay back what I heard from you there, it's not so much the religion, but it's more so the lack of community that might be at the root of some of this. And that's where I read a great book by Elaine de Botton, the gentleman behind School of Life. And that was a very eye-opening book, again, with respect to, maybe there is a part of religion that I've too quickly smacked away in my childhood and gone, okay, there is a value for religion, for community and perhaps religion as a consequence. But where do we get this sense of community, and where do we have the social pressures that socialize a fundamentally, perhaps by nature, antisocial or unsocial kid?
Well, look,
I'm not sure. I haven't shared this.
Oh, I'm so sorry. There really is a delay.
Go, Kelly.
So
Go,
I'm
Kelly.
so
I'll share this. No. All good. You go for it. And I'll mention this in a little bit.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, you and I are talking, albeit a little bit lagging in time, but talking through this. So if you started saying something and then I sort of then had an expression of, what is he talking about? Or I don't like that, or whatever. You could pivot mid-sentence if you want. So if you know you're going somewhere and then I look really displeased and we weren't having this sort of like proper debate or conversation where we could both be honest, but maybe you're in a job interview or maybe you're talking to a mate, you can pivot around my facial expression. And if we're in the same room together, you can even pivot around whether my feet move or whether my hands move or whether I sit up more straight. And now what kids have is not only a lack of community where you've got a range of people in a loving unit, right? A range of people in a unit who can respond, but you've also got children not spending very much time with people who will react in real time with a whole microaggression.
Absolutely.
With a whole kind of like plethora of different responses to whatever it is they're saying. So we really are replacing really human necessity, like communicative necessities, with online, put something out there and you're damned forever. You go and talk about your thing.
I want to take that baton and add on to that as well. So with, I heard someone say that sanity is socially mediated or something to that effect. And again, without and that might, another way of rephrasing that might be something to the effect of the way that you get the kid to not be a narcissistic little gremlin and to become a social, productive adult is to have that direct feedback in real time to their behavior. And I wonder whether there's time. I know that there's some literature that looks at the efficacy of punishment or reward depending on the time delay. And when you're online, you can say something, you can behave a certain way, and then what is the punishment or reward mechanism? And it's certainly detached from the real time facial expressions, but then also it's delayed. And I wonder again how much that contributes to what I would almost say the breeding or the incentivizing of narcissists. And again, I view it as like this, I don't know if masculine, feminine is the right way to describe it, but or like yes and no. There's a lot of yesing to young kids. There is not a lot of no. Listen to your adults. Listen to the...
They don't use the word no.
And it's okay. So this is where again I think it comes to almost like that perspective that, and I would also call this an ideology, in the sense that it's an incomplete story. It doesn't have all of the characters. That nature is fundamentally good, and that society is fundamentally oppressive and bad, as opposed to, like, you look around, everything that I have at my fingertips, this Mac, the light, the camera, the DSLR, all of it, that's culture that I've inherited, and an understanding of what I should do with my life. There's certain benefits that I have with respect to that. Culture isn't all bad. And also my nature, there are certain parts of my nature, if I'm very awake to it, that are certainly not pure and what I suppose it's the social Nitzen, there is good and evil, and it runs down the center of every heart, or something to that effect. I hope I didn't butcher that quote, but this notion that the kid is good and all you need to do is say yes, yes, yes to bring out the best adult, as opposed to you have to say no, you have to, and a part of the no is me watching your face, right? And me saying something that is antisocial and that might scare you or disgust you, and seeing your face and going, okay, if I behave like this, I'm going to be kicked out of the tribe, and it's almost like that there's this ideology that just says all you need to do to the kid is say yes, yes, yes. And so this comes into, again, it has correlates or like intersections with modern dating and parenthood. There's to love someone. What does that mean? We get this sense, and I think it reminds me of what you said before around women and men don't always, what they say isn't always what they want, even if they think it is. That I think I learned when I was a young boy that the best way to be a partner, a boyfriend or a husband is to at base say yes, like do what she wants, make her happy. But sometimes what makes her happy and feel safe is saying no. And I think the same applies to a kid. There needs to be the conditional love and the unconditional love. The unconditional love that says you as you are, in a way, are forever perfect. But also, in another sense, the unconditional love that says you could always be better. And part of my love for you and my respect for you as a child, as a human being, is going to be your pursuit of that better part of yourself. And if kids don't get that messaging, and I wonder whether fatherless homes have a role to play here as well, and whether also sexual revolution, you can see it's all like, there are all these tie-ins.
This is so
but
difficult,
whether that's
because
part of what's creating the narcissist.
Look, we basically said you don't have to stay in a crappy marriage to people. What we forgot to say is you do have to work really, really hard at a marriage. And if you're going to bring children into the world, you owe them, both of you, to work your
and the marriage is good.
off. Yeah. But Speaking as somebody, I've been in love with my husband for nearly 25 years, and I've been a mother for over 21 years. And I can honestly tell you, my love for my children is completely unconditional. But part of my love for them is wanting them to have the easiest time they possibly can in the world, which is by being decent people. By being decent people. My husband, however, it's up to him how he behaves. It's up to me what I accept. So it's up to me if if my husband decided to go out every Wednesday, Thursday and Friday night and get wrecked at somewhere at a pub and not come home, then it's up to him how he behaves. But it's up to a friend of mine said that he thinks about his wife. It's like, look, as a person, you can do whatever you want. But as my wife, that's how they feel about each other. Like as my husband, he can,
it's
as
conditional.
a person,
it's conditional.
yeah, he can do whatever he wants. So I can't stop him. But as my husband, then I have certain expectations. But it's really
there are
difficult.
certain responsibilities that come with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've never been a housewife. Even when I was a stay-at-home mother, I'm really untidy, terrible human being. He's much more tidy. He's actually much more tactile than I am as well. He's much more. I think I grew up in a house with not too many hugs and stuff. So my husband's much better at all that sort of stuff, which I guess if you wrote down gendered roles, you would expect me to be much more tactile. But he is. We managed to fill the whole circle of what it takes to be decent parents. We just don't necessarily tick exactly the same boxes as another set of parents. But we do really need a proper conversation, I think, into how do we square this? How do we fix this road that we've gone down? We don't want women or men to be in marriages. It's certainly, women that I know that have been in really, really horrible situations. We don't want to keep them in it at all. And that's what allowing divorce and so on has meant, is that women didn't have to do that. But we also don't want children growing up in fatherless homes. And we do know that children growing up in fatherless homes are much worse off than other children. And that might be simply, the feeling of abandonment, because it doesn't matter how nicely you do a divorce, one parent still leaves the family home. So that's always going to be really bad for a child. And two, a child doesn't get to see conflict resolution and doesn't get to see how two adults live side by side as two separate people. I never thought about that. So I wonder if that really contributes. Like, I've got 4 children, so my children better than a single child, an only child. Conflict resolve all the time. Like I've got 3 sons.
Yeah.
They have to conflict resolve without punching each other, which they do pretty successfully. But they still have to do, have to do it. Whereas somebody in an only child. Oh, and also, there's 2 other things I think are really worth looking at. One is,
please,
has our society changed with more and more children going into daycare at very young ages, like infancy, as babies? Has there been any impact on not being raised on a kind of full-time basis by someone that loves you? And that could be a grandparent, that could be a father. Ultimately, I think it should be a mother for the first year of your life, because we're mammals and we live a really long time, and we take a long time to grow into adults. So I think it should be a mother. And I think mothers gain a lot from that as well. But I'm not saying that's an absolute. I'm saying it's a choice, but it should be a valuable choice. And also, I wonder.
And I think also we're not quite sure if a very, very young baby doesn't have its mother in early infancy. Are we sure that doesn't affect it in a negative way as it develops and grows older? I'm not, and maybe it's best to err on the side of caution here as well. So I think the general claim of, unless you can quite confidently explain to me or show to me that it's not at all going to affect the baby, then being a mother and being a father for that matter, when you do that, the baby should be the priority, right? And so, I think you can only not do that if you can be certain that it's not going to screw the baby up. And there's this thing that there's this messaging that it's like each to their own, do whatever you want. Let's just logistical solution, give the baby to someone else and pay for them to take care of it. And I'm not so sure that you mentioned before, like your intuition or your instinct. And I wonder whether that's a good example of disembodied intellectualization, where we think, oh, no problem, it's just a logistical issue, like just give the baby, make sure it doesn't die, pay someone a couple of bucks for the 8 hours, get them to take care of it. And it's like, you have no idea how deeply that might affect the baby.
Well, when you've just had your baby, and for numerous months until you stop breastfeeding, you will wake up before your baby. So before your baby starts crying, you wake up. Sometimes your breast might leak, right? I can't think that isn't a connection between a baby and a mother that is so cavalier that we can just say at 6 weeks old, like in America, the pro-life lobby are not pro, let's pay women to stay home with children. So, and I would have more faith in them if they were. If they said, well, look, you're not allowed an abortion, but we will support you financially to stay home and look after your baby. But instead of that, they don't really have any maternity rights to speak of in America. So I can't believe that then that strong bond between a mother and its baby should be something that we should take and think it can be easily replaced as long as someone's changing a nappy. My husband's a really devoted father. I had 4 cesareans. So for the first 2 weeks, he was at home. He's the first person to hold all of our babies because I had cesareans. But he could not hear, he genuinely could not hear the difference between our babies crying for food or for pain or for tiredness. He couldn't hear the difference. I remember, because my first 2 boys barely cried, which is why we have 4 children, because the first 2 were so incredible. And I remember the first time my oldest cried, and he was about 6, 7 weeks old, like really cried. And I said to my husband, "You've done something." And he's like, "No, he's just not happy having his nap." And he put a popper under his head, but he couldn't hear the difference because that's not his biological connection. His hypothalamus hasn't changed while he was pregnant. The baby hadn't bonded with him through bones in utero. So, it's really interesting that we then have to pretend like surrogacy is okay, and what an adult, that a created child is still alive, and all this stuff. It's just, it doesn't make sense. Can I suggest? You mentioned before that. Sorry, Kelly, it's hard with the lag. You mentioned before the almost like the potential reduction of womanhood to just a costume or the lipstick or the mannerisms, and almost that it's like a reduction of motherhood to just a logistical make sure food goes in mouth and it's all good, as opposed to there is this nature within a woman. And not so within a man when it comes to perhaps detecting those subtleties. And to me, it seems like this deeply, it's almost like a respect for tradition and you might say conservative with a little c, and embodied knowledge that has not yet been articulated and intellectualized and then properly tested for being a good idea. And that's where I think that there has to be that harmony between the conservative, we know what works and we have our instincts, and there's all this knowledge and wisdom that's encoded in our biology and our nature, and we can as human beings we can intellectualize and update, but we have to do so from without completely going, okay, all of biology and instinct and nature is something to be done away with. It's almost like that it unmoors us or unhinges us from all of that wisdom. And then who pays the price, right?
maybe the price is the kid that doesn't have his mother in early infancy, and what does that do? Maybe it's the kid that maybe it's the young girl who is a victim of a belief system that doesn't have that conservative, that deep conservative reverence. And again, I come back to the tragic removal of a biological female's breast as a child, and I mean the same goes for like a boy. I cannot imagine someone thinking it to be a good idea to let a young boy, even if they're 18 plus, a young boy surgically remove their penis and tell them that that's going to genuinely make their life better. So now, just quickly as well, Kelly, you mentioned with your husband, you know, that your love for your kids is fundamentally unconditional, but the love for your husband is conditional. You know, as in a sense, as my husband, there are certain things that I expect from you, certain behaviors that are acceptable and not acceptable, and I wonder whether part of the problem, and I watched a segment with you where I think you were mentioning your red pill moment with respect to formally being on the left and then having your eyes opened in some respect as a Matrix reference. And I know that there's a red pill community in the manosphere, which has certainly been eye-opening to me, and understanding that the way that my mother loves me is very different to the way that my girlfriend and my future wife loves me, and that I can do no wrong in my mother's eyes, but I can certainly ruin a relationship with improper behavior with my girlfriend, and men more generally. I wonder whether there's this equality messaging, and also in the sexual revolution messaging that says you can have sex without the responsibility of a child, or also you can have sex, or you have access to sex as a male without being the type of man that is worthy of a woman's trust to produce and take care of a child. That you end up thinking that in a way, I suppose you can project that expectation of motherly love onto a partner or other women, and thinking, okay, well, I'm just entitled to unconditional love. And I also wonder how much of that feeds into this narcissism and victimhood epidemic, we might say. It's a very interesting. One thing that I was going to, sorry, Kelly, go for it.
Okay, so when my kids went to a predominantly middle-class state school, and it was a Catholic school, but it was a middle-class state school, I remember the first time there was a cake sale after school. This is about the word no. And also my kids' generation went to school where they didn't get told no. They would be like, you're on a number 5, now you're on a number 4, or you're a red card. And it would all be stuff like that. It was all this euphemistic way of saying, stop what you're doing now. And there'd be precious little consequences. Anyway, but I remember them going to this cake sale and me thinking that the kids would line up, and then my children would line up. And my children went to line up to make, stand in a queue to make sure they waited their turn. They were like the only kids in the room that did that. Everybody else just dived straight forward with their mothers pushing them forward. And that is a generation, I think. And my oldest is 21, so I'd imagine the kids 10 years older than that as well. They are the generation which were told, of course you can have it, about anything they wanted. And they didn't get, I mean, I didn't smack my children either, but they got time out rather than shouted at or smacked. And I wonder whether the short, sharp kind of dealing with the situation immediately, which is what we referred to earlier, is actually a better method of parenting than the short, sharp, the time out. And also when it goes to childcare,
the drawn out and perhaps more impotent. Impotent,
but also when it goes to childcare and children, young children going into childcare and daycare centres, they will be dealt with on a who makes the most fuss at whatever time. And also when my children argue, I have a vested interest in both the aggressor and the victim coming out with a learned lesson, and because I love both of them. So I want a solution that is good for both of them. So the individual aggressor, I want to make sure he's not aggressive anymore, and the victim, I want to make sure that they're not hit anymore.
Yeah.
And so, there's just so much that we really are getting wrong, and I don't know how to correct it, but I think continual conversations are really good. I do really worry about young men and young women. I worry about young women having to interact with young men. I think more and more young women are watching porn and being told it's perfectly normal to watch porn and to look like a porn star and behave like a porn star, or OnlyFans or whatever it is. So
yeah, social media has definitely hit young girls. If you're constantly surrounded with the ideal, and women, the ideal, I put it in inverted commas here, but the ideal physique, and that only the people in the top 1% make it with these social media algorithms. It's essentially like the 80-20 principles, and then also that you happen to be the sex that is more harshly judged based on your physical appearance on average by the opposite sex. You can see how something like that can affect girls in particular, but then also with the boys. Again, I think there's this lack of the no, of the conditional that says you in order to earn, and this is again, it's like that intuitive knowledge. I think most boys, when they watch porn, they know on a very deep intuitive level, this is wrong, this isn't right. And they can be convinced otherwise. They can have the disembodied rationalization. I remember going on a hike with a number of lovely people, and I spoke to this German, and he was telling me how he was implying that he was ahead of the curve in his country. The fact that they had sex education that told young boys it's normal to watch porn and it's normal to masturbate. And I said to him, well, hold on a second, because we have, as young men, we have a sexual drive that has evolved over, again, eons and eons and eons and eons, to compel us to take risk, to develop character, to delay gratification in a competition against all other men, such that a woman who we find attractive chooses us. And if we all of a sudden, at a couple of clicks of a button, can get the same dopamine or the same response, an orgasm, or the same outcome to a degree, bad outcome, different, but if we can get that, what kind of men does it produce? And maybe it produces the type of men who sexually objectify women, the type of men who aren't committed to raising a child, the type of men who aren't committed to negotiating with a woman and perhaps taming the gratification of their impulses in service of a high ideal being the family. And then all these boys are being told, it's normal. It's normal. Don't worry about it. Watch all the porn you like and masturbate. There's nothing wrong with it. And obviously that's a bit hyperbolic, but you can see how that type of messaging does not create the type of men that women look for in order to have kids. They don't feel safe. And I watched a great documentary called Birth Gap not too long ago that was just highlighting this very, very sad situation of the increasing number of women who find themselves not deliberately, but accidentally find themselves in the situation of being too old to have kids, despite wanting them. And something like 80% of them said it was because they never found the right person. Where are the right people? And again, I just think there's such a lack of good messaging to young boys to create men that actually make women feel safe and such that they would long-term pair bond to bring up healthy kids.
Well, this is why Peterson's really important,
It runs
isn't it?
very deep.
This is why Jordan's really important, because he's actually telling men to look at themselves, whereas a lot of men that speak about these issues will talk about what women are doing wrong. You know, it's all feminism's fault that men aren't delivering on whatever it is that they need to do to make themselves happy. And we know that you men live longer if you're married. So we know that it's actually like holistically better for you to be decent enough to have a heterosexual pairing. You know, it's just. I also think.
Yeah.
That
and I think you can play that long-term game with a. Sorry, Kelly. The lag's cutting.
Don't apologise when you interrupt.
With a young kid.
We're properly overlapping, so it's absolutely fine. But also, I think there's another thing, and I think if you wait too long, then your checklist gets longer, and your expectations get higher. So you're probably better pairing off before your late 20s, because then you have different sets of criteria. I think if you're single until you're 35, then someone's going to have to be incredible to make you give up your whatever singlehood brings to the table. So I do think there's something about that. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think men need a long, hard look at themselves and what they've done to contribute, because if women didn't have anything to fight against, feminism wouldn't have happened. If women as a collective were really happy, there would be no feminist movement. I think the feminist movement really let mothers down. I think being a mother is a bit of a superpower. You know, I literally in my body grew 4 babies that are now, you know, the youngest is 14. They're now like these massive humans that are all sort of taller than me. And I look at them and they are the best and the worst of me. You know, when they're rude, I'm like, oh God, I hear myself. And the thing with being a parent, right, is
but Kelly, just on that, I think it's stunning. It's stunning I love hearing mothers speak openly about how much they love their kids and how it's such a central part of their life. And you know, I think one of the best things that my mother ever did was she would consistently say, if I had the chance to do it all again, I know for a fact that the best part of my life was having us kids. And the type of self-love that I think that can instill in a child is crucial. And, you know, I've heard other mothers speak around their children of how much of a goddamn burden they are. And how, you know, just a couple of things quickly. I met my girlfriend at a Jordan Peterson event, of all places. And she has a deep, deep respect for I would say, the sanctity of motherhood. And we have been in situations where mothers with their kids are telling us overtly, we've expressed we want to have 5 kids, we want to have a big family. And then the mother expresses to us in front of her kids, don't do it. They are a hassle, they are a pain, they're a burden, and that's the message. They are a burden. What are you telling your kids? And what kind of trauma does that instill in a young person to think I'm a net burden here, instead of you are literally and this is where I think it comes back to having that unconditional and conditional, and how if we don't have that, the kids don't have that feeling of, you know, it's a net positive that I'm here, but also balanced with there are things to do. And there are parts of you that need to come out, and it's going to be scary and it's going to be difficult, but I believe that it can come out. And if it does come out, everyone benefits, not just you. And it's just so beautiful to hear you speak about your kids like that. And I think that's it's an unfortunately increasingly rare thing. You know, and even the idea of saying to a young girl, motherhood is good. motherhood is good. And same to a young boy, fatherhood is good. That's what you should be aiming for. And it's not all about just enjoying whatever you're doing for you. Maybe there's a bigger, maybe there's that bigger picture worth sacrificing for.
Yeah. As parents as well, certainly as a mother, I can't speak for my husband, but as a mother, I sort of think everything my children do that's wrong is my failure, and everything they do that's right is their success. It's something like when people talk about, oh, I'm happy not to be a mother. I can understand that. No, I believe them when they say it. I just have no understanding of what that could possibly feel like. That I wouldn't have wanted children.
Well, I wonder. I wonder whether that's the intellectualization again, and I wonder how much of that is a not necessarily a bottom up true belief, but a top down. Let me rationalize why I can enjoy my lack of taking responsibility for a child.
Well, look, we're in a credit card system, aren't we? We're in a system, we sort of, for a long time now, we're in a system of immediacy. So whatever makes you immediately happy. So, making a purchase, I'll get it on credit. Buying a house, I won't save the mortgage. There were people in my generation, sort of 25 years ago, that got their first mortgage and then the house price plummeted, but they were on 120% mortgages. So they were in debt with no house, and debt for a house.
Oh,
so we are in an age where you don't really, there is no delayed gratification. And I think it's foolish that we all will be old eventually. And I don't think anybody gets to 75 and says, you know what, I just wish I didn't have kids. I think there's plenty of people that get past the age of childbearing women who wish they'd had them. But it's tough, but it's totally worthwhile when you first. So my two oldest are 14 months apart, and you sort of think when you're having your second baby, how will I find love for the second baby? Because my first baby, I'm just so overwhelmed. And then your second baby comes along and you're like, oh, well, it's just like the first. You just find a whole heap more. And then the first time they interact and show kindness and care, or even laughing with each other, then you find a whole nother bit of love, which is loving the fact that your children recognize that they have a sibling love. So it just is amazing. And then eventually what happened is this thing came along in 2015, and my youngest was old enough that he wasn't completely tied to me all the time. And then I got to do this, and I get to do it knowing that, we get feminists, coming at the event. And when I used to actually host proper sort of events, people would go, oh, I've got no childcare. Can you provide a crash? And I just think, well, when my kids were younger, I just didn't go to stuff. I didn't expect the whole world to go, well, hey,
but what about all those fun nights out with your girlfriends? Yeah. Yep.
I mean, no women like me, so I never had any friends.
I've been to events before where I've seen, children in whether it be prams or children at music festivals with I don't know, noise cancelling or whatnot, headphones. And I'm just thinking, couldn't you just maybe pass on this one?
Yeah.
And maybe that's, maybe you signed up for that in having the kid. Kelly, I would love to I want to clarify what happened at Let Women Speak Melbourne.
Yes.
And I want to speak a little bit about what's going on, perhaps with that top-down messaging that we mentioned much earlier. And also Moira. I want to speak about Moira and clarify just this mess that we have in Victoria. Before I move to that, I wanted to share with you just two other what I would consider absurdities, right? These moments where you realize something is up here. Two little instances of absurdity or of red flags that I wanted to share with you before we move on to speaking about Moira. One was we actually have a similarity with respect to printing troubles. So we went to Officeworks, the major printing company in Australia, And we have custom dimensions printing that we need for our signs when we go out and have these conversations on the streets of Melbourne. And one of them, we asked them, so we got a pushback on the last one. It was pride flag for or against. And we wanted to unpack with people, what exactly does the pride flag mean to you? And why are you supportive of it? Are there parts that you are supportive of and parts that you aren't?
Yeah.
Anyway, at the end of printing it, the manager came up to us and said, we're not printing any more of your signs. I said, interesting, why is that exactly? And they said, our team takes offense to a question. So we go back in the week after, and in preparation for our conversation, I thought I'd try something, and we tried to print adult woman equals adult human female. They would not print it. They would not print it, and they said that it was inciting hatred, and therefore went against their policies. And this isn't, bear in mind, this isn't just an attendee at the desk. This is a manager who the first time said, we're not doing the pride flag for or against. And then we went back with this one, as well as a number of other signs. We spoke to the manager of that manager, and he called head office of Officeworks. And then now we then emailed them afterwards and said, hey, we just want to make sure, we were trying to get some signs printed. What's going on here? Is it actually in opposition to your policies? And they said they stand by their decision. And I'm just thinking, what is going on here? This is wild. And if we can't print a question and we can't print a statement like that, what exactly what kind of messaging is that sending? And I think, again, I want to come to Moira, where I'm thinking, what kind of messaging is this sending to young girls? Before that, we were invited to, me as CGC, as Common Ground, we were invited to speak at the University of Melbourne medical conference. They were organising a national medical conference for med students. And we accepted the keynote. We were coordinating because the theme of day one was truth, transparency, and trust, I believe it was. And so I thought immediately, I'm going to do something on gender. I'm going to unpack it. I'm going to see what these med students think about gender. 2-3 weeks later, something to that effect, they rescinded the invitation. And they rescinded the invitation under the euphemistic doublespeak of there's been a change in whoever's up the top, and they're saying they want someone who's more verified or something to this effect. My girlfriend happens to know someone who is on the board of the conference or the committee or something to that effect. And she went back and forth with a couple of messages where he typed out and said something to the effect of, there are some questions that simply should not be asked. And my girlfriend is Jewish. And she said, and he was obviously referring to the transgender question, the gender question more generally. My girlfriend is Jewish or has Jewish ancestry. And he said to her something to the effect of, would it ever be appropriate to ask whether you're for or against the genocide of Jewish people? And just I find the comparison utterly disrespectful. And again, it's just another instance of, we have medical students. This guy wasn't even a student. He's actually graduated students who are now doctors, who are now the caretakers of the culture, saying that some questions with respect to gender must not be asked. And again, I'm here left thinking, what is going on? What is behind this med student who should be the most analytical and of clear thinkers, saying you cannot ask what exactly is gender and what are the implications of the language, and especially for young kids.
Well, it's a cult.
So anyway, I thought I would share that little story with you. I would love to now go to the Let Women Speak event in Melbourne. So for context, anyone who's listening, and I would love you to fill in the gaps here, Kelly. Moira Deeming is a member of Parliament in Victoria, Australia, where I live. And she, as far as I'm aware, advocates for sex-based rights, including biological female-only safe spaces. And this advocacy has earned her the labeling by some as a transphobe or a bigot, as would be expected at this stage of the cultural progression, I suppose, or regression, depending on how you look at it. She attended your Let Women Speak event in Melbourne and gave a small speech. We watched it last night, myself, Liam, and my girlfriend. And she gave the speech on behalf of a friend. So her friend wasn't able to attend. She's given this speech. And she has, a couple of events have happened. She's now been expelled from the Liberal Party, which is, in many people's eyes, the main conservative party in Australia. And things are somewhat in the air at the moment with respect to what exactly is going on. There is, I believe she has a defamation case against the Liberal Party leader in Victoria. And there is definitely a groundswell and a petition that is going around at the moment, organised by the Women's Forum, whose CEO is Rachel Wong. And perhaps I will also pop this petition in the description of this video. I'm not going to ask people to go ahead and sign it. Make your own mind up, but listen and understand what's going on. And if you disagree with what's going on, then sign the damn petition. So with that said, I wanted to start quickly, Kelly, with with Let Women Speak. What is the goal? What actually happens at these events? Or what's supposed to happen?
So what's supposed to happen is women are given a space. We create the space in which women can come and speak in the public square, because what I was finding from 2015 onwards is that I was being cancelled from the modern public square, which is social media. So I'd get censored and my accounts would be deleted, or I'd get sort of suspended from Facebook for 30 days for saying a man is a man. And so we started doing these events, and then what was happening, we were doing sort of hall events, and then the halls were becoming vulnerable, or you try to do it in a hotel and then the hotel would cancel. So then we thought, right, we'll take it right back to the proper public square. We started them in Speaker's Corner, then we went and did a couple in the UK, then we toured America and then Australia, and attempted to tour New Zealand. And the whole idea is that women come and speak specifically about what this transgender cult, what ramifications it's having for her life. So it might be her children, it might be school, it might be her employment, it might be her husband, she might be a trans widow, like a woman whose husband's decided he's a woman. But that's what the point of the event is. And we amplify it, and I broadcast it on YouTube, and it's really become a global movement.
I think it's a fantastic idea. Get people to openly state what they believe and why, and express their concerns. And I know that there has been a lot of pushback. Again, if people haven't seen that documentary of yours, I urge you to watch it. It's going to be in the description. But that's a fantastic. I sent it to both of my sisters as well and said, watch this fantastic documentary to open your eyes to what's going on when women say, hey, I'm not sure I agree with this and I have my concerns. When you were in Melbourne, what was Moira's role? I know that she attended, I know that she gave the speech. Was she also a part of the coordination? I'd love to clarify that with you.
She was part of I think she might have been the person to ask for permission to speak on Parliament steps. So she might have put that in. And she organised directly with me, but there was also another organising team that did things like the banners and so on. It was, I'm not going to lie, it was very difficult to organise in Australia. And so I'm not familiar with all of the nuts and bolts of it, but Moira was definitely part of it.
But, yep. And that's the impression that I got from the recording that was on your YouTube, that Moira was certainly helping you out, coordinate the event, and then she also spoke on behalf of a friend when you were there. Now, we were also at the event. I mentioned this to you before. We were at the event. We interviewed a number of people who were there for the event and who were there to speak. I think we interviewed a marshal of some sort. We also interviewed one or two of the people who are with the trans activist side of things, very, very difficult to have a conversation with those people because they just don't want to have a conversation. And this is part of the challenge is we need to be speaking with each other. We need to be having these conversations and clarifying exactly what do you believe and why, and exactly what do I believe and why. And just because you disagree doesn't make you a bad person, but let's iron things out. So to give people context then, and we saw this, a lot of Melburnians saw this on the news, but they, again, major concerns about mainstream media in Australia. Some neo-Nazis showed up at the event. So all of a sudden, we're there watching. You're on the right-hand side of us on Parliament steps speaking with a group of women around you. To our left, there are quite a large number of trans rights activists, or maybe trans activists, making a lot of noise, and the police are having to barricade them off. And then a new contingency of trans rights activists show up in front of us, so another part. So essentially there's two trans rights activist groups, completely outnumber your number of people. So rather intimidating rather intimidating as me, a man my size, rather intimidating if you're a woman who's coming to say, hey, I don't like biological males in my space. And then I don't know where they came from. And it's also worth mentioning there's some Antifa there with the trans rights activists dressed in all black. Mm-hmm. Where these next people came from, I don't know. But some neo-Nazis on the steps, dressed in all black. They look similar to the anti-fascists. But what gives them away is they start doing Nazi salutes. Now, I just want it on record, and I want to be very clear. Did you know that they were coming, and did you have any affiliation whatsoever with them?
Not only did I know they weren't, whether or not they were coming, I didn't have any idea that they were coming. I also didn't know they were there. So you've got steps. So as we saw some freedom people as well. So in between Let Women Speak and the so-called neo-Nazis, we're a group of freedom people. Now, in my country, freedom is all about lockdowns, vaccines, currency, cashless, all that sort of stuff. That's what I thought the freedom people were. And so then I thought that, and I knew that there were some people dressed all in black with masks because the security had told us, and I'd made an assumption that they were Antifa. So I just made that assumption. So as I come out, and I come from the left of Parliament and walk out, I think I do anyway. I walk out from the left. I'm then told to go on the steps. So I can't see, because these people are to my right, pardon the pun, but because these people are to my right and they're also a group away, I have no idea they're there. I don't know if they're doing Nazi salutes. I don't know. I don't know what they're holding. I might have been told what they were holding, but I don't think I knew what they were holding. And I don't think I really saw them. I didn't even see them give the... So they then walk... So they're adjacent to us, so they're on a right angle to me. And apparently, from video footage, they give a Nazi salute there. But I haven't seen that, haven't been notified about that. I don't think many women who are facing the speaker have seen those people, sort of who then would have been to my... Where would they have been? If I'm facing it... Yeah, they would have been like behind me.
Kelly, what we can do, because we have footage from the day, so we could show someone, we could pop up on screen for people who are watching this on YouTube, what the layout was. But it's certainly, if you're speaking looking this way, and then this group is essentially where you are to me, and you're speaking this way, something's going on over here to your right. It's understandable how you're not going to see them.
No.
Then I don't know whether they move of their own accord, but they get moved into a more kind of public area. Yeah.
Yeah. They get marched by the police. And they go, so if I'm looking at a person speaking, or I'm speaking, now if I'm speaking, I must have been able to see them, but I didn't see them. So I either I'm too busy in what I'm doing, or I'm not in a position where I could have seen them, even if I looked directly, even if I looked in a particular
Yep.
place. So then they go directly opposite, and I think I must be speaking at this point, or I'm certainly looking there, and that's the first time I see the Nazi salute, and the police have led them single file. We'd all assumed when they started moving, because I remember having some sort of conversation either at the time or afterwards, I'd assumed that the police were then leading them off. So we assumed when they went to do when the police led them helpfully to go and do a Nazi salute in front of all the press, we assumed the police that they were then leaving. I can't remember now whether they left or not, because obviously then, and then what I have to decide at that point.
Can I share here? So what happened was they get kind of walked out. They do a Nazi salute to the right of where you're. If we're in your position, they're off to the right. And again, we can show footage to perhaps contextualize this. They do some Nazi salutes. Then they get walked across the Let Women Speak event for God knows, well, I do know what reason, right? It didn't seem like it would, taking them out the other direction towards the trans right activists did not seem like a good idea. So I understand that. But also, not a very good look for Let Women Speak if the mainstream media wants an opportunity to tarnish the event and also to try and hit your reputation, you know, to try and get pictures of people doing a Nazi salute in front of your event. And I'm conscious that there are a lot of people who the ones who don't like what you're doing. One strategy that they have and that they're trying to deploy is making you look like some kind of Nazi affiliated person. And I've seen this in an interview with the ABC, right, between John Pizzuto and I'm not sure who the person from ABC was, but they bring up, you posted on some social media platform a picture of the pride flag with a Nazi symbol on the front of it or something associated with the Nazis, and then they work it and they massage it to make it seem like you're the Nazi. Or you're somehow advocating for Nazism. And it's just this, it's rather disgusting is the word that comes to mind. This disgusting manipulation of whatever they can get their mitts on to promote the agenda that they want. And it's disgusting because to think that is the state of journalism is very upsetting and concerning. And it means that everyone has to be incredibly conscious of what they're filtering and asking, like, what do I have the full story here? So to be uber clear, you didn't have an affiliation in these people who rocked up alongside your event. The police, for some reason, have kind of marched them in front of Let Women Speak, supposedly to not get them interacting with the trans activists, who you could have seen how that could have got physical. But in doing so, the mainstream media has picked this up in Australia and then massaged it to somehow make out Let Women Speak as a Nazi affiliated event, or if the Nazis support what you're doing, then obviously what you're doing is horrid. And to me, it's just like, give it a rest. I mean, you can say you disagree with Kelly, but to make such a long jump, the problem is that everyday people, have to filter through all of this manipulation of of what's happening to get to what you're doing and to understand what you're doing. And they can still disagree with what you're doing. That's fine. But it's a dismal state of affairs where the average person has to do so much research to just understand what you believe and why. And that's part of what I wanted to get out in this conversation. It's like, let's just lay it out and make it super clear that this isn't, you're not a neo-Nazi. You're not affiliated with these people. And to try and tarnish what you're doing by affiliating you in that way, it's a real shame. It's a real shame. So you're not affiliated with them. Now, on to Moira. Okay, so Moira has helped you coordinate this event in Melbourne. and she believes in sex-based rights. My understanding, I don't know Moira's full story, but my understanding is that she has a past that you know, she has a dog in the fight here, so to speak. I mean, she herself is a woman, but also, you know, she understands the vulnerabilities of women, especially if we say that anyone who claims to be a woman can use the same space as a biological female. So it's all gender ID. Now, what are we to make of this now? Right? Like, what kind of message is this sending to young girls who are concerned with the fact that biological males can now say, I'm entitled to use the same bathroom and change room as you? So what do we do? What's the appropriate response here in your eyes?
Well, I think actually the biggest victories I've ever had in getting across this message is when the trans activists behave so badly and when the lies are so great that normal people can just see it for what it is. So even with the the whole Nazi thing, it's just been published in a newspaper over here, and I'm talking to lawyers. So I've been, you know, really successfully libelled in a national newspaper here. And so that's always a bit of a gift.
Also, I'm just sorry to hear. I'm sorry to hear.
Look,
Just the fact that
from the ashes, we still victories.
What you're doing gets you that kind of branding.
Well, look, it is what it is. It's horrific, but at the same time, it's a gift. You know, the same about the mobbing in New Zealand. New Zealand was silent on this. They were just taking away women's rights, and they were sterilising kids, and nobody was allowed to talk about it in your country. I've met women who know families who have lost their children because they won't affirm, right? So it's as bad as it can get, I think, in both countries. And so that's a gift, and it's horrible for the people who are victims of it. But if we want to win this war, there will be some battles that seemingly it looks like we lose, but actually we claim victory right from the jaws of loss.
Right.
That's one of those things.
I see what you mean.
And what we do, look,
So
your country did hard lockdowns,
sorry,
right?
go for it.
Your countries did really hard lockdowns, and a lot of people then lost faith in the legacy media. And then what happened with legacy media? Even like shows that we all enjoyed, we sort of saw behind the curtain, because so many shows that were just massively produced and you thought these people were super talented and so on, you then saw them without the gloss and the lights and the makeup and the so on, and then you're like, okay, so this is the trick of this particular form of entertainment. And so I think that we are on the precipice of a new truth, if you like, and at the moment we're in a period of untruths, but I don't think humans are going to put up with it for too long. So what we have to tell, parents have to step up and become adults again. And anybody in a room, and I say this all the time, you should fear your silence more than your words. So often we are afraid of the consequences to ourselves if we speak up about something. But I think it's so bad right now that really, if you've been silent about this so far, you now have to act. And look, those Nazis turning up, some people will just be reminded, but will just go along with it. Instead of your words.
That's powerful.
Oh, thank you. The Nazis turning up, some people will go, oh, she is a Nazi. Oh, yeah, definitely. Oh, that's a terrible thing. Look at these poor trans activists screaming and shouting in the street and getting protected by police. Look at those poor people. And there will be people on the other side of it who already knew the issue, and there will be some people in the middle, more than we think, more than we give them credit for. There will be people in the middle that will say, well, that's a bit weird. Somebody must have given permission to those men to meet on those steps, because otherwise you're not allowed to have a gathering on the steps of the Melbourne Parliament. And so there will be people that are moved to find out what's really going on.
Do you think that a permit was given to the neo-Nazis who showed up?
I was not allowed to stand above the top step. So there's a top step that's then like another platform area. I wasn't even allowed to put a bottle of water on it. So do I think that the police, do I honestly think that those Nazis were stood on those steps without the permission of the police? Why? I can't think why that would be if I'm not even allowed to stand.
Okay, so this is, I heard you speaking somewhere about this. If you wanted to, now I'm not saying that this is the case, But if you wanted to strategically ruin your reputation or try and tarnish your reputation in the eye and give ammunition to the mainstream media, then maybe you would grant a neo-Nazi contingency a permit on the same day as Let Women Speak. And then, I don't know, I'm not saying that that's exactly what's going on, but you can see, I have my concerns. I have my concerns, especially given who's up in charge in Victorian government and the types of things that they advocate for. And then, I mean, the real concern, right? The real concern is if it's from, and I'm not all that involved in Victorian politics or politics more generally. I like operating on more of the philosophy and psychology side of things, and sociology. But if there's one party that's advocating for this trans inclusion, no problems. Let's hear what you believe and why. But then there's supposed to be the other side as well that says, well, hold on a second. Let's push back. Let's push back on this inclusion messaging. And that you can have faith that there are people having that conversation and negotiating a balance. The problem is now that if someone who's supposed to be the opposing voice that negotiates now starts saying yes, and the Victorian leader of the Liberal Party, the conservative side of things where I live, starts saying we're all about being inclusion-oriented, inclusion, it's like your thing is supposed to be drawing appropriate boundaries. And that's supposed to allow for the negotiation to happen with the people who are all inclusion. Yeah. And that's where it's becoming a concern, as I see it. And I see Moira as being part of Moira getting caught up in this. And again, to what you said around, sometimes the best thing to happen is that publicity that comes from the madness that might happen, these little points of chaos. I wonder if what's happening to Moira is what's waking up a lot of people to, this isn't just about inclusion and making some people feel more comfortable. There's more to it, and the language has ramifications. And again, that's what I want to try and open people's eyes to in these conversations around gender is there are plenty of people who are unthinkingly compassionate, inclusion, equality, diversity, especially in Australia where we are pro-multiculturalism. But that needs to be mediated. It needs to be mediated by that voice that says, okay, inclusion of what exactly? Because maybe we don't want to include something. And then we need to get clear on what that something is.
Well, maybe we don't want to include a 52-year-old bloke in the changing room with our daughters, right? And I think you can only do this in the society that really doesn't care about women. To start. You can't put these. You cannot introduce.
And this is what I mean. This is what I mean about the misogyny side of it. I think that there is a part of this that is at some point trans inclusion becomes politically correct misogyny, and I think also at some point gender affirmation becomes politically correct homophobia, where young boys who are feminine are being told they're actually a girl instead of being told, you know what, it's actually okay to not be the stereotypical male. And that isn't irreconcilable with what we were mentioning before, where young boys in general should still be encouraged to become men that can take care of women such that they can have children. Kelly, I'm very conscious of time here. I'm so appreciative of the time that you have taken to unpack all of that with me. And I think that we have done, hopefully in the eyes or ears of the listener, a good job of laying out what exactly are some of the contributing factors here that you cannot get to in a 30-second soundbite. You cannot get to that level on TikTok. And you need to go deeper. You need to understand the psychology and how it ties in with the language, right? And people's yearning for meaning and religion and all of this. It's complicated. I would like to once again, I suppose this is the part where I'll say, if you are concerned with what's going on, and you are concerned that a politician who advocates for sex-based rights is being pilloried and expelled from her Liberal Party, her political party for doing so, I urge you to then sign that petition that's going to be in the description. That's the part. I want you to, I don't want you to just do it because I say, I want you to do it because you believe that that needs to be, we need a signal to our politicians from a bottom-up level that is not okay. And we need to tell young girls that you can say that you are concerned. If you feel concerned, you can say you feel concerned. It's not okay to have someone like Moira be the sacrificial lamb for a gender ideology like this. So before we wrap up, Kelly, where can people find more of you, and where would you like to direct people who want to hear more about what you're doing?
Okay. For you lovely Australians, if you want to support what we do, you can go to adulthumanfemale.space, where you can find all the incredible merchandise. And what I've been really lucky that I've managed now to, some women that have really lost quite a lot in these cultural wars against women. I'm now in a position to get them to be able to earn a living by running these sort of satellite stores. But standingforwomen.com, and also Kellie-Jay Keen, or at the Posie Parker on Twitter, and I'm Kellie-Jay Keen on YouTube. But I'm everywhere. Just Daily Mail any day of the week. I'm everywhere.
Yeah, and I would love to. Yeah, if you want, one of my red pill moments to what you do was that documentary. So I'm going to put that in the description as well for people to watch. For my final question, I would love for you to imagine you are speaking with the listener directly now, and they've listened to this entire conversation, and they were to leave with only one key takeaway. What would that takeaway be?
That nobody is born in the wrong body.
Kellie-Jay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.